Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Let me back up and explain how this whole mess started. I'm an accountant by trade, which means I'm naturally detail-oriented and I keep everything. Every receipt, every document, every piece of paper that might matter someday gets filed away in labeled folders. My wife used to joke that I could probably reconstruct our entire financial history going back 20 years just from my filing cabinets. Little did either of us know that this obsessive record-keeping would eventually save us both a lot of money and a massive headache. 15 years ago, my wife and I bought our dream house. It's nothing fancy, just a modest 3-bedroom ranch built back in the 1970s. The place had good bones, a big backyard, and most importantly, it was within our budget. What made the property special wasn't the house itself, but its history. Our lot sits on what used to be part of a much larger farm that got broken up for development back in the late 1980s. When the developers came through in 1989 to build what they called the housing development around our area, they approached the previous owner about selling. The old farmer who owned our lot refused to sell. He was stubborn as a mule and had no intention of moving, so the developers had to work around him. They built their entire community in a circle around our property, leaving us as what you might call an island in the middle of their development. The important part, and this is where my record-keeping obsession comes in handy, is that when they built that development, our property was specifically and explicitly excluded from any involvement with their homeowners association. It's right there in black and white on our title deed, signed and notarized back in 1989. The language is crystal clear and states that our lot is exempt from any and all covenants, restrictions, and fees related to the surrounding development. For 15 years, this arrangement worked perfectly. We minded our own business, kept our property neat and tidy, and never had any issues with the HOA that governed all the houses around us. Sure, we'd hear stories from neighbors who lived in the development about the board's petty tyranny. They'd get fined for having the wrong color mailbox, or for letting their grass grow a quarter-inch too tall, or for putting up a welcome mat that wasn't on the approved list. We'd listen politely to these complaints and feel grateful that we didn't have to deal with any of that nonsense. The HOA board members would change over the years, as these things do, but they all seemed to understand that we weren't part of their jurisdiction. We'd get occasional invitations to community events, which was nice, and sometimes we'd attend the annual block party, but nobody ever tried to enforce any rules on us or collect any fees. It was a peaceful coexistence. That all changed last spring when a new board got elected. The new treasurer was a woman I'll call the treasurer, though everyone in the neighborhood knew her by reputation long before she got involved with the HOA. She was the type of person who complained to store managers about expired coupons and demanded to speak to supervisors when her coffee wasn't hot enough. Getting elected to a position of authority in the HOA was like giving a power-hungry person the keys to the kingdom. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in early April. I was getting ready for work when my wife called me to the front door. She was standing there holding a piece of paper with a confused look on her face. The letter was printed on bright red paper, which should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to be a pleasant interaction. The header read, "Final notice of delinquent account" in bold, aggressive letters. Below that was a breakdown of charges that made my coffee go cold. According to this notice, I owed 10 years of back dues to the homeowners association. They calculated monthly dues at $150, which over 10 years came to $18,000 in base fees. On top of that, they'd added late penalties and compounded interest that brought the total to $19,850. At the bottom of the letter, in smaller but equally threatening text, it stated that I had 10 days to pay in full, or they would begin collection proceedings and legal action. My first reaction was to laugh. Clearly, this was some kind of clerical error. Someone in the HOA office had mixed up addresses or property numbers. It happens all the time with bureaucratic organizations. I figured a simple phone call would clear everything up. But when I called the number on the letter, the person who answered was not interested in hearing about any mistakes. The treasurer herself got on the line and her tone was immediately hostile. She told me that they were cleaning up the books and collecting on all outstanding debts. When I tried to explain that my property wasn't part of the HOA, she cut me off and said that they'd heard all the excuses before and wouldn't be fooled by people trying to get out of paying their fair share. That's when I decided to handle this properly and in writing. I spent that evening putting together a response packet. I made copies of our title deed with the exemption language highlighted in yellow. I included a copy of the original development plans from 1989 showing how our lot was excluded from the HOA boundaries. I even threw in a county plat map that clearly showed our property line and how it related to the development around us. I sent all of this via registered mail with a polite cover letter explaining the situation and asking them to remove our address from their billing system. I figured that would be the end of it. After all, I'd provided clear, documented proof that we weren't members of their association and never had been. I had severely underestimated the raw, unadulterated entitlement of a bored HOA treasurer with too much time on her hands. A week later, another red letter arrived. This one was even more aggressive than the first. It stated that they had received my appeal and it had been denied. According to the new letter, my property was within what they called the community footprint and benefited from their landscaping and security services. The letter claimed that my exemption was outdated and no longer valid, and that they were administratively absorbing my property into the community rolls. The 10-day deadline for payment remained unchanged. I was starting to get annoyed, but I still thought this could be resolved through reasonable discussion. That assumption died completely when the treasurer showed up at my front door 3 days later. She arrived on a Saturday morning while I was working in my garage. I heard the doorbell ring and came around to find a woman in her late 50s holding a clipboard and wearing the kind of expression that suggested she was about to ruin someone's day. She introduced herself as the treasurer and immediately launched into a speech about how I'd been dodging their notices and getting a free ride for 10 years. She said I was enjoying high property values thanks to their community standards without paying my fair share, and that this amounted to theft. I tried to stay calm and reasonable. I invited her to look at the county plat map I had handy and started to explain the history of our property and how it had been excluded from the original development. She wasn't interested in hearing any of it. She cut me off mid-sentence and said she'd already seen my map and it didn't matter. According to her, they were simply making an administrative correction to include my property in the community rolls. She said I could pay the $19,850 or I'd wish I had. The way she said that last part sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't someone who was confused about the facts or making an honest mistake. This was someone who knew exactly what she was doing and didn't care about documentation or legal boundaries. She wanted money and she was going to get it one way or another. That's when I realized this situation was going to get ugly. The harassment started immediately after the 10-day deadline passed. First came the phone calls from a debt collection agency. They started calling at 7 in the morning and didn't stop until 9 at night. Weekend calls were common. The collectors were aggressive and rude, accusing me of being a deadbeat and threatening to ruin my credit score. I tried explaining to each caller that the debt wasn't valid and that I had documentation proving my property wasn't part of the HOA. Most of them didn't care and just read from their script about payment arrangements and settlement options. A few were decent enough to say they'd pass my information along to their client, but the calls never stopped. Then came the yard sign. I came home from work one Tuesday to find a large laminated notice staked into my front lawn. The sign was about 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall, clearly visible from the street. It read, "Notice of delinquency" in red letters, followed by my address and a statement about unpaid HOA dues. Every neighbor walking their dog could see it. Every car driving by could read it. My wife was mortified and begged me to take it down, but I knew that removing it might give them ammunition to claim I was interfering with their collection efforts. The final straw came when they filed a lien against our property. The notice arrived from the county clerk's office on a Thursday afternoon. According to the paperwork, the HOA had filed a formal lien claiming $19,850 in unpaid assessments and fees. The lien was now part of our property's official record and would have to be satisfied before we could sell or refinance our house. I was furious, but I thought that was as bad as it could get. I was wrong. The following Monday morning, I got called into my boss's office. My supervisor looked uncomfortable and kept fidgeting with papers on his desk. Finally, he asked me if everything was all right at home and whether I was having financial difficulties. That's when he told me about the phone call. Apparently, the treasurer had somehow found out where I worked and had called my boss directly. She'd told him that I had a nearly $20,000 delinquent debt and that it spoke to severe financial irresponsibility and poor character. She'd actually asked my boss if the company made a habit of employing deadbeats. My blood ran cold. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to destroy my reputation and ruin my life. At that moment, I realized they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I went home that night and told my wife what had happened. She was as angry as I was, but she was also worried about what this might do to my career. I assured her that my boss wasn't going to fire me over some crazy person's phone call, but I also knew that we couldn't let this continue. That weekend, I put together what I started calling my Go Box. I spent 2 full days organizing every piece of relevant documentation I had. The centerpiece was our original title deed from 1989 with the exemption language, but I didn't stop there. I included 15 years of county property tax records showing that we'd been paying taxes directly to the county, not to any HOA. I printed out photos of the yard sign they'd put up and created a timeline of every contact we'd had with them. Most importantly, I kept a detailed log of all the debt collection calls, including times, dates, and summaries of what was said. I also asked my boss to write a statement about the treasurer's phone call, which he was happy to do since he was annoyed about being dragged into the middle of someone else's dispute. By Sunday evening, I had a thick binder full of documentation that told a clear story of harassment and abuse of authority. Monday morning, I started calling lawyers. I didn't want just any attorney. I wanted someone who specialized in real estate law and had experience dealing with HOA disputes. After several phone calls and consultations, I found exactly what I was looking for in a lawyer who had built his practice around suing homeowners associations. When I walked into his office with my binder of documentation, I could see his eyes light up as I told him the story. He kept interrupting me to ask for clarification on specific details, and by the time I was done explaining the situation, he was practically rubbing his hands together. He told me that what the HOA had done was a gift from a legal standpoint. They'd put a lien on a property they had no jurisdiction over. They'd engaged in harassment and defamation by calling my employer. They'd violated federal debt collection laws with their aggressive tactics. This wasn't going to be a defensive case where we'd have to prove they were wrong, he said. This was going to be an offensive lawsuit where we'd be seeking damages for their illegal behavior. Within a week, we filed a lawsuit against the HOA seeking $100,000 in punitive damages, plus all legal fees and costs. We also requested an emergency injunction to have the illegal lien removed from our property records and to stop all collection activities immediately. The lawsuit was just the beginning of the most satisfying few months of my life. The discovery phase of litigation was particularly enjoyable to watch. My lawyer buried the HOA in requests for documents, emails, meeting minutes, and financial records going back 10 years. Since they'd opened this can of worms by claiming authority over my property, he was going to examine every aspect of how they conducted their business. What we found was even better than I'd hoped for. The deposition of the treasurer was the highlight of the entire case. My lawyer had prepared for days, and watching him work was like seeing a master craftsman at his trade. He started with simple questions about her role and responsibilities, then gradually worked his way up to the more damaging material. When he asked her whether she'd reviewed the original development plans before sending me the first bill, she admitted she'd only glanced at them. When he showed her the large exempt stamp over our lot number, she claimed it looked like a clerical error. When he asked whether she knew that HOAs can't administratively absorb properties that aren't legally part of their association, she got defensive and said she was just trying to collect what was owed. The best part came when he asked her about the phone call to my employer. She tried to claim it was just a routine credit check, but when he pressed her on why she'd used words like deadbeat and questioned my character, she got flustered and started contradicting herself. By the end of her deposition, it was clear that she'd acted maliciously and with full knowledge that what she was doing was wrong. But the real bombshell came when the judge ordered a full audit of the HOA's finances. Given the questionable tactics they'd used against me, the judge wanted to make sure there weren't other problems with how they managed their money. What the auditors found was shocking even to my lawyer, who'd seen plenty of HOA corruption over the years. The association was nearly bankrupt. The treasurer had been massaging the numbers for months, trying to cover up a massive budget shortfall that stemmed from a combination of poor financial management and what looked suspiciously like embezzlement. She'd been targeting properties like mine as quick fixes to balance the books, hoping to collect large lump sums that would buy her time to hide her mistakes. The audit revealed that she'd sent similar bogus bills to several other properties in the area, though none of them had been harassed to the extent that I was. Most had simply ignored the letters, figuring correctly that they were scams. When the audit report was presented in court, the treasurer's own lawyer advised her to plead the Fifth Amendment rather than answer questions about the missing money. The entire HOA board was now potentially implicated in what looked like fraud and conspiracy. The treasurer resigned her position that same day, right there in the courtroom. At that point, the HOA's insurance company took one look at the mountain of evidence against them and decided to settle immediately rather than risk a jury trial. They'd seen the documentation proving that my property was exempt from their authority. They'd seen the evidence of harassment and defamation. They'd seen the audit report showing financial mismanagement. They wanted this to go away as quickly and quietly as possible. The settlement was everything I'd hoped for and more. I was awarded $30,000 in damages for the harassment and defamation, plus all of my legal fees paid in full. The court also issued a permanent injunction barring the HOA from ever contacting me again for any reason. The illegal lien was removed from our property records and expunged from all credit reports. But the best part was what happened to the HOA itself. The insurance settlement, combined with the costs of the audit and their own legal fees, left the association with a massive debt that had to be paid somehow. Since they couldn't collect from me, they had to levy a special assessment on all of their actual members to cover the costs. Every homeowner in the development got hit with a bill for over $500 to pay for their treasurer's crusade against me. The entire board was voted out in disgrace at the next annual meeting. Several homeowners filed complaints with the state attorney general's office about the financial mismanagement. The treasurer herself disappeared from the neighborhood shortly after resigning, and nobody seemed to know where she'd gone. As for me, I had $30,000 in settlement money and some decisions to make about how to spend it. That brings me to my favorite part of this whole story. It took a few months for the settlement check to clear and for all the legal paperwork to be finalized. During that time, my wife and I talked about what we wanted to do with our unexpected windfall. We could have put it in savings or invested it or used it for a vacation. Instead, I decided to invest the money back into our property in the most visible way possible. We hired a contractor to build a beautiful new swimming pool in our backyard. It's not huge, but it's perfect for our lot and its position so that it's clearly visible from several of the houses in the development around us. The pool itself cost most of the settlement money, but I saved some budget for one final touch that makes the whole project complete. I had a custom bronze plaque made and mounted on the new fence around the pool area. It's classy and tasteful, but clearly readable to anyone walking by. It reads, "The No HOA Fees Pool. Paid for by the HOA Board 2025. All welcome except former treasurer." Every morning when I have my coffee on the back deck, I look at that sign and smile. It reminds me that sometimes standing up to bullies not only works, but can be incredibly profitable. The neighbors in the development have been surprisingly supportive. Several of them have come by to congratulate me on the lawsuit and to share their own stories about the former treasurer's tyrannical behavior. A few have even asked if they can use our pool, which we're happy to allow as long as they bring their own towels. I learned something important from this whole experience. There's a reason why bullies usually target quiet, non-confrontational people. They assume that we won't fight back or that we don't have the resources or knowledge to defend ourselves effectively. What they don't realize is that quiet people often keep very good records. I taught the HOA board that if you're going to come after someone, you'd better make sure they're not the one who keeps all the receipts and knows how to use them. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going for a swim in my harassment settlement pool. The water's fine, and the view of my exempt property is even better. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I saw the recent post about someone's bullying teacher, so after responding to that, I decided to type up a bit of a more detailed version for the entire sub. So to start out with, I'm going to tell you a little about my disabilities. I have Tourette syndrome and ADHD. It makes learning a bit hard, but I was homeschooled by a professional teacher growing up, so I got the accommodations I needed, no issue. One thing I struggle with is writing by hand. I do not know why, but it literally hurts. My mom used to say that the pencil was my biggest enemy in learning. My hand will cramp up hardcore if I start writing, and I end up with larger and larger writing as I go. As far as I know, I'm holding the pencil correctly, so I really don't know why. I also have a tendency of concentrating so hard on the act of writing I miss literally everything that wasn't on the projector. In fact, I might miss entire slides as well because of my slow, painful writing. So because of these reasons, taking notes is a bit of a challenge. That's what accommodations are for, though, right? So my learning accommodations for college were 1.5 private testing. They actually always gave me double time, God bless them. The ability to record lectures, and a note taker. So in college, I never had any issues. I was able to concentrate on the lesson because I'm more of a visual learner, but also I got notes to study. It was great. Until I hit American history. The teacher was this smug God's gift to teaching type of guy. To be fair, he was born for it. He had the exact same name as a certain Confederate general, and he was an amazing lecturer. He assigned me his TA as a note taker and would take the notes and copy them for me after class. After a couple weeks, though, he noticed I wasn't attempting to take notes. He got upset. He claimed that the only possible way to learn was to take down notes, and if I didn't, he'd refuse me any future notes. I was gobsmacked. I tried to explain that my learning style was different and that I needed to listen to him and pay attention to the board because otherwise I could miss a slide, or things that weren't on the board. I was an A student on the dean's list every semester, so that should have been enough, but nope, it wasn't. So I told him I'd make a compromise. I never needed to record any other classes, but I'd bring in a tape recorder. He was happy with that and continued to give me the notes. This is where the malicious compliance starts. I did bring in that tape recorder, but I never once listened to it. I'd let it run and the tape would fill up in about 3/4 of a class and I wouldn't turn it over. The following week, I'd turn the micro cassette over and record 3/4 of the next lecture. Then I'd take the tape, flip it over, and record over week 1's partial lecture. It was enough to get him off my back. I really should have reported him. Refusing to give me notes could have gotten him in serious trouble due to violating my ADA rights, but I was a stupid kid. I told my disabilities counselor, but never escalated it because I came up with my simple, malicious compliance. I ended up overall enjoying the class. Like I said, he was a great lecturer, just a crappy person for being ableist. The next one is an entitled people story. I've spoke a lot about my sister here, but my bad aunt is pretty entitled too. Since I have 2 aunts, I tend to refer about them as the good aunt and bad aunt. As for my bad aunt, she's been married and divorced 3 times, has lost multiple houses, and is one of the few people to ever make my grandpa genuinely angry. When my mother was growing up, she was the middle child. Her elder sister was the favorite, and her younger sister was the baby. My grandparents, sadly, until recent years, were somehow blind to their favoritism, and about a week ago, my mother let them have it, so they can't deny it anymore. My bad aunt is very much like a predecessor to my sister, guilty of many of the same things, but her life is not one I'm very well versed in because my mother worked to shield me from her bad sister all my life. But some things still slipped through the cracks. For instance, during the 2000 New Year's party to welcome the new millennium, my bad aunt decided to show up at my parents' new house with a bunch of people that were not invited. My mother caught these people trying to go through her stuff and had a huge fight with her bad sister before kicking her out. And my bad aunt, I think, yelled something about my mother not deserving the house and she hopes she loses it. It was all downhill from there. Much like my sister, my aunt is guilty of infidelity and sleeping with teenage boys. She had a 16-year-old, I think, named Tim, crashing with her in the 90s. That guy was way too proud of the fact he could karate chop a board in half. My bad aunt's first husband was actually a good guy, or so I'm told. I barely remember the man. Can't even remember his name. All I can remember is flannel shirts and a mustache. My bad aunt's second husband was 8 years her junior. And frankly, the guy was and still is somewhat obsessed with her. He was crazy. He was self-taught in fixing things. But he left a lot of projects unfinished, would fly off the handle for no reason, was terrible with kids, and was just generally very confrontational. Him and my aunt bought a house together once. It was a pretty old one, and I can't remember where it was because I only went there once. But while in the backyard, I noticed some planks covering a square area. And since the house was so old, I asked if it was an old well. He immediately went off on me and ranted about how if it was a well, he'd have to pay an astronomical amount to fill it in, and wells aren't allowed in cities, etc. I was just a naive country kid. I didn't know. But apparently it was the remains of an old hot tub. Thankfully, my bad aunt divorced that man. But about 4 years ago, he swung by looking for her. Then there's my bad aunt's third husband. I never really hated the guy. Disliked, sure, but it felt like he just got a lot of hate for his past. He was a part of a rehabilitation program for drug addicts and ex-cons my grandparents used to be involved with, and my bad aunt convinced him to elope with her. At the time, my grandparents had just bought a property for her to move on, and my grandpa, that was literally the first time I can ever actually recall seeing him genuinely mad. He said they didn't buy a property for my aunt just so she could take that guy and elope. My grandparents ended up clearing and reselling the property for a profit, and my bad aunt along with her third husband lived in their basement for like 7 years. The whole time she was henpecking the man, and even once forced him to walk around wearing an anime shirt she found in a random box at an auction. Then my grandparents bought a second property way out in desert nowhere 8 hours away, and that's where they put my bad aunt and her husband, number 3. About the time my bad aunt turned 60, her looks changed really bad. She was the kind of person who stays good looking up till their late 50s, and then suddenly it looks like a truck hit them. And now she resembles my grandmother. But even despite that, my mother believes her sister still had an affair. Like, who would she have an affair with out in the middle of nowhere? But she apparently sent her husband away for a while so he could do it. The guy ended up going nuts. He broke into my grandparents' house so he could crash in the basement while they were away. He broke into the trailer my sister left the family to pay off, and left candy wrappers all over it, and my bad aunt filed for divorce when he got back. Don't know where the guy is now, but it's not really my problem. As for my bad aunt's supposed affair, we believe it was with her second ex-husband, because he's over there. My grandma tried to say he was a handyman crashing in their second house's basement, but no, it's my bad aunt's crazy second ex-husband, and now my entitled sister has to be around both my bad aunt and him. Can't really say I feel sorry for her, though, not after what she put us through. My mother was very traumatized by her older sister when they were kids, and My bad aunt apparently did something so bad to her my mother won't even say what it was. Just mentioning it once made her start crying, and that was just her saying that her sister had done something to her, and she just couldn't go into detail after that. Either way, my bad aunt has been a scar on the family a long time. She's so bad that my mother and good aunt refuse to be around her for any reason. Because of that, my grandparents have to have separate Christmas parties in different places, and soon my sister may be just as unwelcome. Currently, my bad aunt is running the finances of my grandparents' side business, and she's suspected of embezzlement, but they won't do anything about it. When my grandparents pass, she'll be getting that middle-of-nowhere house anyway. Anyway, thank you for watching.